Feminism isn't misandry. It's not about hating men. It's about dismantling systems that prioritize men at women's expense. But when you've always been centered, equality can really feel like disrespect. And when you're used to having power, being treated like an equal can feel like an attack. So I want to talk about why calling feminism man-hating isn't just wrong. It's lazy. We're going to unpack what feminism actually is and why so many men seem to confuse equality with hatred, what respect really means, and why this conversation matters more now than ever. I'm Sonni. I'm a certified relationship coach and trauma bond expert, and I've spent years helping women recognize, escape, and rebuild after abusive relationships. And my work focuses on the psychology of abuse, not just the obvious violence, but the subtle systemic patterns that ultimately keep women completely trapped, doubting themselves, and blaming themselves for someone else's choice to be cruel. And that's exactly why I want to talk about this, because abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just come from one man with bad behavior. It is shaped by an entire culture that teaches men that their feelings should be centered, that their authority should never be questioned, and that equality is somehow a threat to them. I've seen firsthand how those beliefs feed the dynamics of coercive control and trauma bonds. So this isn't some abstract debate for me. It's about understanding the roots of abuse, dismantling the systems that enable it, and giving women the language and the clarity to finally stop blaming themselves for someone else's entitlement. So let's start by getting crystal clear on some words, because most arguments about feminism happen because people don't even agree on what words mean. Feminism is the belief that women deserve equal agency, opportunity, safety, and power. That's it. It's not about reversing the hierarchy or putting women above men. It's about dismantling the hierarchy so that gender isn't what decides who gets safety, autonomy, or respect. Now, equality and equity, two words people love to confuse. Equality means everyone gets the same thing. Equity means we address the imbalances that exist so outcomes are actually fair. For example, equality says women can report abuse. Equity asks why women are still disbelieved, blamed, and punished when they do. Equality says women can apply for jobs, and equity asks why they're paid less, promoted less, and harassed more when they get them. We don't just want equality on paper, we want equity in reality. And before we go further, let's put this modern feminism has gone too far talking point in perspective. That line is actually older than feminism itself. When women fought for the right to vote, people said we were going way too far. When we wanted to own property, to work without permission, to get a credit card without our husband's signature, we were going too far. When we called marital rape a crime, we were going too far. When we demanded protection from domestic violence, too far. Every single gain that women have made has been met with that same phrase. So when you hear feminism these days has just gone too far, what you're really hearing is, I liked it better when women had less. And now this is the perfect opportunity to talk about the word misandry, because people throw that word around without even understanding it. Mostly men. Misandry means the dislike or contempt for men as a group. And it exists, but it's not systemic. And it doesn't shape the laws, it doesn't determine who gets believed in court, or decide who literally lives or dies. Misogyny, on the other hand, it isn't just hatred. It's a system. It's centuries of laws and norms and institutions that have treated women as less. Misogyny kills women. It kills women at the hands of their partners. It silences them in courtrooms. It keeps them from leadership positions. It discredits their pain in hospitals. And it normalizes their exploitation in relationships. Misandry, it bruises feelings. Misogyny ends lives. And men are often labeling something as misandry when what they really mean is, my ego feels bruised. If a woman sets a boundary, she calls out misogyny, or simply just stop centering a man's comfort in everything. That's not hatred, that's equality. And equality feels like hate if you think that you're supposed to be above someone. And I want to say something here directly to the women who say, I'm not a feminist, because I hear it all the time. And I need you to pause and really think about what you mean by that. Because if you believe that you deserve safety in your own home, if you believe equal pay for your own work, the right to vote, the right to open a bank account without a man's permission, the right to say no to sex even if you're married, the right to say you're not a feminist. Congratulations, you believe in feminism. That's feminism. Some women reject the word because they've been taught that it's ugly, angry, or some like anti-man thing. Some avoid it because they don't want to lose male approval. And I get it. We live in a patriarchy. Other people think it's too political or too extreme. And that's not an accident. That is how the patriarchy protects itself. It smears the movement that is fighting to free you so that you'll distance yourself from it. And the truth is, if you've ever worn pants, owned property, gotten an education, had a credit card, divorced an abusive husband, reported a rape, or kept custody of your children, you have feminists to thank for that. If you're on the internet speaking, having an opinion, you have feminists to thank for that. Feminists want women to have the choice to work, to stay home with their kids, to have your own money. Just make your own decisions for yourself. Nobody's asking you to hold a sign in the street or quote bell hooks to call yourself a feminist, though bell hooks is amazing and you should absolutely read her books. But if you benefit from those fights and you still say, I'm not a feminist, I want you to ask yourself, is that actually your belief? Or is that the shame that someone else has planted in you? Feminism isn't a dirty word. It's the reason that you get to decide who you are and what you do and how you live. And rejecting that label doesn't make you neutral. It lets the people who want to roll back your rights breathe just a little bit easier. You're making it easier. So no, feminism isn't misandry. And disliking misogyny is not the same thing as disliking men. They're not mirror images, right? One is structural power and the other is individual opinion. And pretending that they're the same, that's how misogyny actually protects itself, right? By convincing you that critique is hate. And one of the biggest reasons that men say feminism is man-hating is because equality costs them something. Chuck Derry, the founder of the Gender Violence Institute, once said, if men are truly open to equality, they have to give something up. And he's right, because equality doesn't just mean that women gain rights. It means men lose unearned advantages. It means they're no longer automatically prioritized. They're no longer the unquestioned authority. They're no longer handed invisible labor by default. And when you're used to being centered, it feels like a loss, right? When the system always bends around your comfort, equality feels like an attack. And that's why the whole like feminism is misandry narrative thrives. Not because feminists hate men, but because many men hate losing power that they were never entitled to in the first place. One that I always find just so wildly ironic, and it just hits you right in the face when you see it. Men really hate being grouped, right? Not all men, they hate it. Grouping men, man, nothing pisses a man off faster. But they're very happy to group all feminists into misandrists, right? That group, you're totally fine to make that group because it's fitting what they want you to think. It's how they keep women against each other, which gives them power, which only maintains the patriarchy. And none of this is just theory, right? We see it in action everywhere. When women entered the workforce en masse, men had to compete for jobs that they once had guaranteed to them. When women demanded shared emotional labor and parenting responsibilities, men had to do more at home. When women named coercive control and psychological abuse, men couldn't hide cruelty behind, well, hey, that's just how relationships are. None of those things are hatred. That's balance. But balance feels like somebody stealing something from you when you've been overpaid your entire life. Now, a huge part of this conversation comes down to one word that men and women are using so differently: respect. Many men were raised to believe that respect means deference, right? That being respected means never being questioned, never being told no, and always having the final say. So when a woman disagrees, right, she's going to set a boundary, correct him, or just simply refuses to center his comfort, a man will see it as disrespect. But it isn't disrespect. It's equality. Respect isn't about obedience. Respect is about recognizing a person's humanity and autonomy and their right to their own thoughts, their own choices, even when they don't align with yours. But if a man's version of respect is don't challenge me or contradict me or, God forbid, hold him accountable, that's not respect. That's control. And everybody's talking about, oh, women versus accountability, because women refuse to be accountable for the choices that men make, for the behavior of men. That makes sense. that women are not accountable for men's behavior. Men always want to say, she provoked me, as if they have no free will, as if they have no self-control. And I genuinely do not understand why men hate themselves so much, why men think so little of men. Because I think men are capable of self-control. Men are emotional beings. They're allowed to have feelings. Men are capable, men are necessary. But this version of respect that men are touting, it's not respect, it's control. And this misunderstanding, I'm being generous there, is honestly everywhere, right? A woman says no and she's disrespectful. She should have said no nicer. She should have said no faster. She shouldn't have said no at all. She sets a boundary, she's disrespectful. She won't tolerate emotional neglect, and now she hates men. These aren't acts of disrespect. They're acts of self-respect. And women are allowed to have that too. In fact, men tell us to pick better men, and then when we don't pick them, we're being disrespectful. Feminism demands that men evolve their understanding of respect, because equality doesn't mean that you're disrespected. It means that you're not automatically deferred to. It means your authority isn't assumed. You have to earn it. And I know how much men hate that. But if equality feels like disrespect to you, it says a lot more about your expectations than women's intentions. And there's another layer to this too, right? And honestly, I think it's one of the most revealing parts of this. So many men only offer kindness, protection, or provision as part of this transaction. You've heard that logic, right? If women want equality, then they don't get chivalry. Or if she's not sleeping with me, why should I protect her? Well, the message is always the same, right? I'll do the decent thing, but only if I get something in return. But if kindness disappears when your reward stops, then it was never kindness, it was leverage. And this is why the men are the natural protectors argument just falls apart. If protection was natural, they would do it without needing to be compensated. I want you to check out my other videos on this because I go into way more detail. You do not have to teach a bird to fly or a fish to swim, but you do have to give many men something before they'll protect or provide. And often, even when you do, they still won't. Real protectors don't harm the women that they claim to protect. Real providers don't use money to trap women. Real kindness doesn't just evaporate the second someone says no. Feminism, it threatens this entire transactional setup because it removes the owed part. Women are no longer obligated to reward men for basic decency. And instead of rising to the standard of being good because it's right, many men would rather punish women for no longer paying them for the bare minimum. So when men say things like chivalry is dead, what they really mean is, hey man, this transaction stopped working. Women stopped performing gratitude for table scraps. Women stopped treating leverage like love. And men mistook the end of that transaction for hate. Another bad faith argument that always comes up is if women want equality, then equal rights, equal fights. It's meant to sound clever, right? But it's actually ridiculous because it takes a movement about dignity, safety, and opportunity, and it reduces it to fistfights. It's also very revealing because what that phrase actually means is if I can't have power over you, then I want permission to harm you. And nothing about that is justice. That is resentment. And you just sort of dress it up like it's logic. And then there's the biology argument, which is another one of my favorites, right? Men are stronger, so what? Yeah, on average, men have more upper body strength. Women on average live longer and are more resistant to certain diseases. What does that mean? None of that means anyone deserves more power. Biology explains differences, right? Not hierarchies. Equality has never meant sameness. It doesn't mean pretending those differences don't exist. It means refusing to let them define our worth, and it's certainly not going to dictate our safety. It means saying that regardless of muscle mass or some reproductive role, that women are entitled to the same protection, the same respect, and the same opportunities as men. I don't know why you guys are so quick to want to fist fight women. It's weird. You're weird. If your version of equality actually requires you to physically fight a woman to prove a point, you are not arguing for fairness. You are literally showing everyone how deeply you resent losing control. Equality and equity are often used interchangeably, but they're not the same. And this difference is at the heart of why men accuse feminism of going too far. Because equality says everyone gets the same thing, and equity says that we make adjustments so that everyone has the same chance at a fair outcome. Equality says women can report abuse. Equity asks why they're disbelieved, re-traumatized, and blamed when they do. Equality says women can apply to the same job. Equity demands fair hiring, equal pay, and workplaces free from harassment. Equality says women can share finances, but equity is going to address the unpaid labor gap that leaves women much more poor over a lifetime. And we can look at home life too, right? Equality says we both work, and equity says, well, then we both carry the mental load and share the decisions and contribute to caregiving. Equality is we split chores, and equity says we split them by time and effort and responsibility, not stereotypes. This is why we already have equality. What rights do women not have that men have? It's why it is such a weak argument. On paper, sure, right? But on paper, women could vote in 1920, but they were still fired for getting pregnant. On paper, women can leave abusive partners, but family courts are still going to hand custody to violent men every single day. On paper, women can work, but they earn less, do more, and retire with less. Equality is just a start. Equity, that's the goal. A good gut check for equity is this: would you accept this system for your daughter? And if the answer is no, it's not equitable. And if the answer is yes, I'm sorry you have a daughter because clearly you have more work to do. Here's something that too many men miss. Feminism isn't only about women. Men benefit from feminism too, whether they realize it or not. I know y'all are in denial about it, but when we dismantle misogyny, we're going to dismantle the parts of the patriarchy that harm men. Men gain emotional freedom when masculinity isn't policed by ridicule and all this shame that men are throwing onto each other. Men are allowed to feel, to cry, to seek help without being called weak. Feminism pushes for parental leave policies that would let fathers bond with their children. You know, the ones that they're always going on about wanting when they get divorced and they're fighting so hard for in family court. You want to bond with your children. Dismantling the patriarchy allows for that. Dismantling this is going to challenge the economic structures that literally force men into workaholism and isolation, and it builds relationships based on mutual respect and safety, not coercion, not fear. Feminism just doesn't erase men. It expands what is possible for men. The problem is too many men can't see the benefit because they're so fixated on the loss of privilege. They're staring down at that shrinking pedestal instead of all of the possibilities that men could have. And this is the emotional root of all of it. Many men conflate their power with their worth. And they think if I'm not in control, I'm not respected. So when women stop centering them, stop obeying them, stop cushioning their fragile egos, they don't see it as equality. They literally feel it as hatred. So many men are going to watch this and hate what I'm saying. But accountability is not an attack. Decentering isn't contempt. Feminism is not anti-men. It's anti-entitlement. It's anti-control. It's anti-hierarchy. And if that feels personal to you, that's not proof that feminism hates men. It's proof that you are benefiting from this imbalance. Before we wrap up, let's walk through some of the most common bad faith arguments thrown at feminism, and then let's just calmly dismantle them with facts, right? Feminists hate men. Naming harm is not hatred. Criticizing the patriarchy isn't about despising men. It is about dismantling a system that harms women and men. Calling out entitlement and coercive control, systemic inequality isn't hate. It is accountability. And if equality feels like hate, it's because you've mistaken being centered for being respected. The next one is we already have equality, right? On paper, yes, like I said, women can vote, work, and own property, but paper laws don't erase lived inequality. National data shows that women in heterosexual relationships still perform about 60% more unpaid domestic labor than men, even when both partners work full-time. That invisible labor is worth trillions to the economy, but it remains unpaid, unrecognized, and expected. Women are also 1.7 times more likely to experience sexual violence than men in the US, and they're over 3 times more likely to be killed by an intimate partner. Globally, intimate partner violence remains one of the leading causes of death for women aged 19 to 44. Women hold roughly 32% of seats in national legislatures worldwide, and they continue to be underrepresented in senior leadership across every sector. On average, women retire with 30 to 40% less wealth than men, largely due to career interruptions tied to caregiving. And in both the US and Canada, courts continue to award custody to abusive fathers at alarming rates, even in documented cases of domestic violence. Equality on paper is not equality in practice. That's why equity and addressing the barriers and imbalances that just are relentless, that's why this is essential. Chivalry is dead, right? Decency is not supposed to be transactional. So if your kindness just disappears when all the obedience stops, then you were never kind. Historically, chivalry was less about respect and more about reinforcing hierarchy, right? Men protected women because women weren't allowed to protect themselves. Feminism doesn't demand that men stop being kind. It demands that kindness is not conditional. Open the door if you want to, but don't use it as proof that a woman owes you sex, silence, or gratitude. If your decency depends on control, you're not decent. Equal rights, equal fights is the one that has pissed me off for years. Equality is not a license to harm, and like I said, you're weird if you think that. Suggesting that women should be physically attacked if they want equal rights, you're crazy. All of that exposes resentment, right? Not fairness. And equality has never meant pretending biological differences don't exist. I think that's clear. It's wildly clear. That's missing the point on purpose. It just means that we're refusing to let men justify dominance or violence. The vast majority of gender-based violence already flows one way, right? Research consistently shows that over 90% of severe injuries and death from IPV in heterosexual relationships, it's inflicted by men against women. Women don't need to enter the ring. They're already living with a level of violence that men rarely experience. Demanding equality doesn't erase that reality. It's a response to it. And you often hear that misandry is a response to misogyny, and that's actually very true. The next one is that the pay gap has been debunked. No, it hasn't. In the US, women still earn about 82 cents for every dollar earned by men, and even when researchers control for like occupation and hours worked and experience, there is still a gap of up to 10% that remains completely unexplained. And that is the part that is attributed to discrimination and bias. And those so-called adjustments are part of the problem because women often work fewer paid hours because they're doing the majority of the unpaid caregiving. They're clustered in lower paid jobs because historically women's work is undervalued. And they leave the workforce more often because workplaces are hostile to mothers and caregivers. And those aren't personal choices in a vacuum. They are structural outcomes shaped by patriarchal norms. So the pay gap isn't a myth. It's just more complicated and more damning than a lot of men want to admit. The next one is that some feminists are just too extreme. Outliers exist in every movement, right? You don't judge democracy by one corrupt politician or Christianity by its most hateful extremists, right? You judge a movement by its core principles and its outcomes. And feminism's core principle is equality. So pointing to some viral TikTok soundbite to discredit an entire global movement, that's just so lazy. It is intellectually lazy. And usually it's just an excuse to avoid engaging with the real issues. The next one is, well, what about men's issues? Men's struggles are real, right? Higher suicide rates, social isolation, mental health stigma. But those problems were created by the patriarchy, not by feminism. When masculinity is defined by domination and emotional suppression and control, right, it hurts men too. Feminism isn't some enemy of men's well-being. It's the solution. Guys, it's the solution. It pushes for emotional freedom, workplace policies that actually support fathers, and a society overall where men's worth isn't tied to dominance. Men's issues don't just disappear because women demand equality. They're better addressed because women demand equality. And I know for me, this is part of why this is so frustrating when some men try to use the sad little pathetic whataboutism to say, what about what's happened to men? This would help solve the very problems that men pretend to care about so much. But if they really did care, and they don't, if it really wasn't just brought up to deflect, those men would be equally interested in the solutions. If men actually want to be part of the solution, not just say that they support equality, right, but actually live it, it starts with interrogating what you think respect means. Notice where you equate respect with obedience and catch yourself when you interpret no, disagreement, or a boundary as disrespect. That's not a woman disrespecting you. That's you revealing why you believe you're owed compliance. I want you to take full ownership of all of the invisible labor. And I don't mean helping, right? Choose one ongoing task like school forms or meal planning or medical appointments, bill tracking, and I dare you to own that from start to finish. Plan it, remember it, execute it, follow through, because that is equity in action. When a woman sets a boundary or she says no, can you respond with maturity? Thanks for being clear. Not thanks for being clear. No sulking, no silent treatment, no withdrawal of affection. If your love or decency is conditional on her obedience, you don't love her. You want to control her, right? You want you to use your voice to shift systems, not defend the systems. Support policies that create equity like pay transparency, parental leave, and stronger protections against abuse. And speak up when misogyny shows up in your friend group, because silence is complicity. And above all, choose accountability over fragility. When women name harm, resist the urge to center your feelings. Listen, reflect, change. Discomfort isn't an attack. It's a doorway to growth. It's the only way to growth. And I'm telling you, none of these things are radical demands. They are the baseline of decency and partnership. And if equality feels too much to ask for you, then the problem isn't feminism. It's how much inequality you're totally comfortable with. None of this is radical. They're just the basics. They're the basics, okay? Here are some books that everyone, but especially men, should read if they actually want to understand this conversation just beyond the surface. Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. This is a deeply researched look at how misogyny isn't just a fringe problem, but actually a global movement shaping men's attitudes about women and power and equality. And it traces how online hate seeps into real-world policies, relationships, and violence, and why so many men resist equality when they feel like it threatens their status. The next one is Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft, which is a definitive book on abusive men and the belief systems that drive them. Bancroft is so good at cutting through all of the myths, right? That they're broken or traumatized or just insecure, and shows how entitlement and control are at the core of abuse. Every man who thinks not all men should read this. Now, the next one is Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny by Kate Mann. It is a powerful explanation of misogyny as a system that polices women into submission. Mann shows how misogyny operates not as an individual hatred, but actually as this social force that punishes women who step outside the roles that the patriarchy has assigned them. And listen, guys. These are not feminist manifestos, okay? They're essential reading for anybody who's actually serious about understanding the world we live in and the systems that shape it. And if men want to be part of the solution, like so many claim to be, then they need to start learning how they've been part of the problem, even without realizing it. Feminism is not misandry, and it's not about hating men. It's about refusing to accept the systems that keep women small and unsafe and silenced. And if equality feels like a loss to you, it's not a loss of your humanity. It is a loss of unearned privilege. And that is not hatred, it's justice. And here's what I want women to hear most clearly. When men call you a man-hater for refusing to be controlled, they're not describing you. They're describing their own entitlement. You're not hateful for wanting equality. You're not hateful for wanting safety. You're not hateful for expecting respect. I want you to comment your thoughts and share this video with somebody who needs to hear it. Feminism isn't the problem. Misogyny is the problem. And naming that out loud, calmly, clearly, and without apology isn't hate, it's survival.